slides up, I'd just like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this gathering. It's been very stimulating listening to the presentation so far. So I'm with the Travelers Health branch at CDC, and what I'd like to talk about today are some of the risks associated with travelers going to mass gatherings. So the mission of the branch is to safeguard the health of US residents who are traveling or living internationally. And it's surprising to some people the amount of people, Americans who actually travel overseas each year. We estimate about 60 million US residents traveling internationally each year. And what we do is we assess the risks associated with given destinations. We assess the risks associated with certain traveling populations, whether it's traveling for tourism or traveling for business, adventure travelers. There's a group of travelers called VFRs, which stands for visiting friends and relatives, which have inherent risks associated with that. And also we look at risks associated with certain events, and that's where mass gatherings come in. And we then take this assessment and develop guidance for groups and for travelers and for physicians preparing travelers for their trips. So when you think about mass gatherings, some mass gatherings are obviously dangerous. I think you might recognize the running of the bulls here in Pamplona, Spain. So there are obvious inherent risks in drinking alcohol and allowing bulls to chase you down the street. Another example may be Ashura, which is a pilgrimage to Kabbalah in Iraq, which 2 million pilgrims take part in every year, and the whole event lasts about 10 days. So there in the top right-hand picture, you will see an example of the ritualistic cutting that takes place during the event. And apart from that, over the last 10 years, there have been a lot of examples of sectarian violence and car bombings associated with this mass gathering. But this is more typical. This is what we expect our travelers are going to be experiencing. And a very benign gathering like this could be a music festival, it could be a sporting event, it could be a religious event. But even something as innocent looking as this has certain risks associated with it. So why are we concerned? Well, there's evidence that suggests that mass gatherings have been associated with significant morbidity and death, and we look at it in two major categories: safety and security issues, and then the disease transmission and the possibility of outbreaks associated with these mass gatherings. So I'd like to just spend a couple of slides talking about safety and security. It's a real issue. We have problems on occasion with venue structures. There have been numerous examples of stand collapses, of fires. Whenever you have large crowds, crowd control becomes an issue, and there are examples of crowd surges, of stampedes, and even violence in certain occasions. Terrorism is an obvious issue. We've noted it in 2 mass gatherings in the past, in 1972 at the Munich Olympics, and even in Atlanta with the bombing in 1996. And no mass gathering takes place in a vacuum. There's the surrounding community, and sometimes there's crime associated with just being within a certain environment. And then also thinking about environmental hazards associated with a given venue. So I've just thrown together some examples of mass casualties at mass gatherings. I think you will recognize some of these. There was the air crash in Germany that killed 70 people. A soccer game in the UK led to 95 deaths. We've seen crowd violence at funerals. An example of crowd surges was in, there are a couple of examples in Mecca, and fires and so forth. So even if you just look in the last 6 months, there are plenty of examples of security issues. So when we look at disease risk, we're not only concerned about individual and group health, we're also concerned about the impact on local public health and potentially on global health. So there's some disease transmission and outbreaks. Something about mass gatherings compound the routine disease factors and the routes of transmission. So obviously person-to-person spread had increased opportunities with direct contact in crowded areas. With overstressed food and sanitation, there's the opportunity for fecal-oral spread. In overcrowded accommodations, there's respiratory transmission. Mosquitoes don't respect the borders of a mass gathering, and there's vector-borne possibilities. We've even seen examples of zoonotic spread in mass gatherings with a music festival in Glastonbury, where feces from cows got mixed up in the mud and led to an E. coli outbreak amongst the attendees. And then depending on the kind of mass gathering and depending on the crowd, the attendees, there's opportunities for sexually transmitted diseases. And again, some examples of these outbreaks. A very well-known one is the meningitis outbreaks associated with the Hajj in 2000-2001. And it wasn't so much the number of deaths at the Hajj, it was the spread of a large number of cases to a number of different countries worldwide. And we've heard in this meeting already about World Youth Day with a multi-strain outbreak there. So some of the factors associated with mass gatherings we've talked about before, but location, we've got to think about what's the endemic disease in the area, are there outbreaks occurring in the area. We think about size of the mass gathering, and often it's not the absolute number that's important, but rather the density of the crowd, the overcrowding in a single space. And then duration of a mass gathering, you have the cumulative risk build-up, but also as duration extends, you start seeing stresses in the infrastructure around mass gatherings. And so venue facilities get overloaded, and water and food handling becomes stressed, and sanitation, toilets, and so you get more and more opportunities for disease transmission. I won't go through this slide, I see it, I've been warned about my time already, but this looks at certain aspects of mass gatherings, increases in population and what the results are, population movement and the results, and how behaviors and services affect the risk at mass gatherings. So I think we've been through this. The venue has endemic disease and outbreaks, and you have people from different regions and countries with their endemic disease and outbreaks coming to the venue. And from our perspective at CDC, we are concerned about US travelers going and coming back and potentially bringing disease. So we are concerned about US travelers being exposed to both of the disease at the venue and disease that's been imported to the venue, and then the possibility of them bringing it back to the United States. We've seen this interconnectivity. Any pathogen can be anywhere where it wants to be within a matter of days. So we've developed at CDC in the Travelers Health Branch, we've developed an approach, kind of a protocol for assessing the risk to mass gatherings. I'll go through this very quickly. We look at exposure assessments, the characteristics of the event. We look at epidemiological assessments associated with the event and the specific characteristics that I've talked about already. And then we put this in a formalized, standardized approach, and we've adapted this score sheet that we use, and so forth. We can check off and give scores to different aspects of the mass gathering. It gives us a sense and a way of documenting our thinking as we come up with a risk assessment associated with that mass gathering. So we've done this for 10 years now, and we've done it for all different types of events, World Cups, Olympics, and so forth. And as I've said, our concern is illness and injury in US travelers, and also the translocation of disease. And the actions we take are mainly in the realm of communications. So we have a website that gets about 30 million views a year, and so we will put up information on our website about the mass gathering, our assessment of the mass gathering. We'll put up guidance to travelers on how to stay safe. We've done other things as well. You can see this little brochure here we've created for the Beijing Olympics that was handed out. On the top right is a billboard that we had up in Vancouver during the Winter Olympics. So to finish up, I'd like to give you an example of our activities surrounding one particular mass gathering. In 2007, the Cricket World Cup was held in the Caribbean and was hosted by 9 countries, 9 different islands in the Caribbean. And we had teams from around the globe coming, and over 100,000 fans expected to the event. So the circle around the star shows the venue, and the other red stars show where teams were coming from. So as we looked at the situation, we were aware that there was dengue, was a risk factor in some of the locations, malaria in some of the locations, and yellow fever, obviously a risk. But also, at that time in 2007, there was this huge Chikungunya outbreak going on that had started in the Indian Ocean and had by this time spread to South Asia. And 4 of the teams from Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan were having major outbreaks in those countries. And there was the concern, because there's a viable vector in the Caribbean, there was the concern of the translocation and establishment of Chikungunya in the Caribbean because of this event. And also, because we have a viable vector in the southeast United States, we were concerned about it being brought up into the US. So we have a way of looking at census data and being able to see where foreign-born people live, and we are able to map it. So for example, here, I'll show you a map of people who were born in India and Pakistan who might be inclined to go to this mass gathering to watch their teams. This is a map of people born in the Caribbean. So we can look where people will be traveling from, and we can do an analysis of transportation hubs to see where people will be traveling through in order to get to a particular event. So we had a media campaign associated with this to provide guidance to people going to this. We had a lot of information on our website. We created an outbound poster that was put in different community settings around the country in these groups that we thought might be likely to travel to this event, warning them about the risks and giving them guidance. And then we placed a returning poster for people coming back into the country after they had been to the event, saying what they should look out for if they experienced illness after they came back. So while we were doing this, obviously there was a lot of preparation going on in the Caribbean. CARIC was the old organization, Caribbean Epidemiology Center. It's now called CARFA. But obviously they were enhancing surveillance capabilities in the context of this mass gathering. They were doing all sorts of steps like mosquito elimination and so forth, training their staff in the recognition of symptoms, isolation of patients, and response plans. And actually the event went very smoothly, and there wasn't an introduction. But the reason I mention it here is because 8 years ahead, this is a map of the Caribbean today, and we had a single case, a single introduction of chikungunya into the Caribbean in late 2013, and in the space of 1 year, you can see it has spread throughout the Caribbean. So the translocation of disease is a very real possibility, and in the context of a mass gathering, the chances of something like this happening are so much more evident. And then my last slide, I just wanted to make you aware that because CDC sees the importance of mass gatherings, they've established now a CDC-wide working group to deal with mass gatherings. And we have people from across CDC with different experience in surveillance, in disaster response, in planning, risk communications, infection control, and we've brought them all together in this working group that meets regularly. And the working group is really available as a resource to anyone, to organizers who might want to use our services. So that's a little bit of an advert. Okay, thank you very much.